Welcome to IP Goes Pop, your source for exploring the interface between intellectual property and pop culture. The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com. This program should not be considered legal advice. Please consult an attorney for your specific situation. And now your hosts, intellectual property attorneys, Michael Snyder and Joseph Gushue.
Greetings and cheers, listeners of IP Goes Pop. This is one of your hosts. This is Michael Snyder. Hello, and I'm joined as always by co-host Joseph Gushue. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Mike. We're back again.
Yeah, we're back. We did it. We made it back again. We're starting our fall season. Again, disclaimer, this is not legal advice. If you require legal advice, please seek out the appropriate type of attorney. And today we are bringing in someone who, he's our own sky captain at Volpe Koenig. Let me say that. We're bringing in Mr. Thomas or Tom Mattioli. Tom, welcome.
Hey, Mike, thank you. It is really great to be here. I'm really happy to be talking about a topic that is certainly near and dear to my heart, which is aviation.
And I just want to say that the title and focus of this week's episode is Come Fly With Us at IP Goes Pop. We are taking to the skies as we discuss intellectual property and the world of aviation. Now, when you think of popular culture, of course, flight is in all parts of popular culture. To set the table a bit here. Well, first of all, Tom, let's talk about a little bit about your background in the skies. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about that so they know that you are definitely someone who is speaking from a place of authority here?
So I got interested in aviation at a very young age. Back in the 70s, when I was a kid, my father worked for a chemical corporation. We took a little trip during the summer, and across the street from the motel, there was a movie theater, and it was playing the movie Midway, in the mid 70s. So one evening, my dad took us to see that, and I just absolutely fell in love with, the naval aviation, the pilots and things like that. And then, not long after that, of course, there was a TV show that was called Black Sheep Squadron.
Sure. Robert Conrad. We talked about it on the pod.
Exactly. And of course, I wanted to be one of the black sheep, growing up as a kid, and I was very involved in aviation. So I basically always had that bug. And then when I was a co-op at Drexel University, I worked for Sun Oil Company. And one of the guys who was in a cubicle a little bit down from me flew. And he offered to take me up. And I was in my early 20s, and I just fell in love with it. I went home and I told my mom and dad, I said, look, I want to take flight lessons. I really want to fly. And they said, yeah, sure, go ahead. So this gentleman, very nice man, he found me a flight school over in Wilmington, Delaware, which is across the river from where I live. And I started training there. And in fact, this might be a little bit of time to tell my funny little anecdote during flight training.
Sure, please share.
So for anyone who isn't aware of it, Wilmington Airport, it's now Newcastle County Airport. It's in Newcastle, Delaware. And it's probably about a 20-minute flight by jet from, or maybe 15 minutes even, from like the Washington area. So it happens to be the airport. Well, right now it's the airport where the current president, who lives in Delaware, flies in on Air Force One. But back in the early 90s when I was training, it was also still the airport where Air Force One would come and they would train. So they would come and they would shoot instrument approaches, which is, they just approach, and then they turn around, they approach again, and they just practice. It's also the home base of one of the Delaware Air National Guard bases, which has the big troop transport C-130s, the propeller planes, which they call the Huskies. So when you're in flight training, one of the things that you practice a lot of is what's called an engine out emergency, where the instructor, he'll pull the throttle all the way to idle on you, and you have to quickly go through the emergency checklist. You have to find a place to land and put it down. And so we were in the pattern, and the landing pattern, and the way you generally go in a landing pattern is you fly parallel to the runway in the opposite direction. You're going to land. You make a left turn perpendicular to the way you're going to land, and then you make one more left turn onto your final approach. So I was on that parallel course. There was a Husky on final approach, and Air Force One was in the pattern doing practices, behind me.
This is a very active airspace, Tom.
A very active airspace.
I'm anxious just listening to this.
So anyway, we're the air traffic controller. It's a towered airport, of course. The air traffic controller tells the Husky he's cleared. He's number 1 cleared for the runway. I'm number 2 cleared for the runway. And Air Force One, which they don't call Air Force One when the president's not on it, they call it by its tail number. But I'm just going to call it Air Force One. Air Force One is cleared behind me, and my instructor turns to me and goes, you got a lot going on here, right? He said, you got that Husky in front of you. Your Air Force One is cleared right behind you. He goes, you know what would really stink right now? If you lost your power. And he pulled my throttle all the way to idle. And he said, well, I guess you better figure out a way to put it on the ground. And remember, you're number 2 in the pattern. So you got to come in behind that Husky and you got to go in front of Air Force One. And boy, that was a very stressful landing for me without any power.
Oh, I'm sure. Tom, your instructor is a maniac to me. Also. he's the guy pulling the throttle on you, and you're the student,
right,
and throwing you in this situation. Oh man,
right. But I got it on the ground safely.
Well, you're going to get on the ground one way or another. It's just safely or not, I guess.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
that's why I said safely.
Yeah, and we usually don't have to do a trigger warning on IP Goes Pop, but for those of you who already have are not huge fans of flying, maybe we'll go back and we'll put the warning in before this, not after. This is like a spoiler warning, but after the fact.
Hey, it all works out. That's the good thing.
It's just to show you how good your pilots are really trained.
No, that makes total sense. I mean, you're making lefts, you know the way to go. I mean, it's all important stuff. I'm glad the professionals are handling this for me.
Well, you two really are lawyers to pull us out of that tailspin. But let's set the table. Let's talk about some of the movies, aviation movies. I'm going to start with one that's an iconic one. I'll start with Top Gun. There's a lot of time spent, in the air. Although if you look really closely, you could see it's the same shots, same clips of the planes, especially when they blow up. But
yeah, that's just American, icon of what we think is a fighter pilot, set in Cold War era, mid 80s. And now we're anxiously awaiting the revisiting of the Top Gun universe, the sequel.
I feel the need for speed. I mean, that's common phrase now.
This is also in the canon of Tom Cruise characters with father issues. This is one of in the top tier of those, which I think is every one of his movies.
Yeah, it's a common theme.
Another one that this is an interesting one because if anyone was to say I'm making a biopic of Howard Hughes, I don't know, they would think about the money, they would think about his kind of descent into a certain type of madness, perhaps, the fame, the Hollywood, but this was The Aviator, the classic Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio movie. Tom, it seemed to involve a lot of realistic flying in it.
Yeah, The Aviator definitely involved a lot of realistic flying. I mean, it's based on the true story of, I'm sure dramatized, of Howard Hughes' life, but the truth of the matter is that he really did date all those women. God, I forgot her name already. Katharine Hepburn, I can't remember, Ava Gardner, I think Hedy Lamarr. I mean, he was really involved with.
He was a Hollywood playboy, but then more importantly, that he was also an inventor and very accomplished flyer. And that's the name of the film about his life is actually The Aviator. That's like sort of what he's most known for.
And he was truly right. And he was truly very much an aviation aficionado. I mean, he really, really loved it and was really involved in it. And many of his ideas were actually quite good. I mean, he recognized very early on that the jet age was really, the jets were really the way that you were going to have to go with commercial aviation. And he tried to set TWA up in that range. And, without some of his intervention with the government, with those hearings and things like that, I mean, they really were almost trying to make a monopoly for Pan American at the time. And I mean, if it wasn't for him, that would have happened.
Yeah.
It was really interesting how so many parts of the film focused on improvements he made to the actual planes, to the actual construction and engineering of the planes, which I think is, we're going to get to that when we talk about our main topic today. Now, here's another kind of a curveball of an aviation movie. And Tom, I'm going to have a specific question for you. Snakes on a plane. Is that a common aviation problem, snakes on a plane? Is that only in the movies, or is this something you encounter when they're,
I really think it's sort of in ground school, one of the very first things they teach you. They show you a clip of Harrison Ford in Raiders of the Lost Ark where the snake is in his lap and they're trying to fly the airplane.
Part of your checklist.
It's part of your checklist. Make sure there's no snakes.
I wonder if we should go back and re-record the anecdote, but instead of cutting the throttle, that the your instructor threw a snake in front of Air Force One. and of course you could not talk about aviation movies without talking about Airplane.
Oh yeah, a classic.
It certainly reflects modern day air travel, whether you're loading in the white zone or the green zone or whatever the zones were. But
without a doubt, I always order the lasagna.
it definitely, it's hard to think about. When I was looking up for the podcast Airplane movies, we can't ignore it. And then Tom, a movie that you mentioned, Die Hard 2, as an airplane movie and also a Christmas movie.
Right.
I know we can't discuss Die Hard on a podcast without saying it's a Christmas movie. I think there's actually a federal law about that now. I don't want to create any controversy.
It's definitely a Christmas movie.
We're all in agreement there.
And again, when you think about popular culture, and as Joe and I have talked about on the podcast, there are certain names of inventors, that do enter the popular culture, and you learn about from when you're, a tiny child in school. Today, we want to talk about the Wright brothers and the plane that they invented and the patents that they invented and the story behind it. Tom, you did a deep dive into this. We talked about it at the firm. It's fascinating. So, start wherever you like, but I think that it would be really so interesting to tell their story and to talk about what really occurred with their patent, what it covered technology wise, and how they tried to enforce it. And not to give any more spoilers, but let's talk about the famous Wright brothers.
Sure. I mean, the Wright brothers obviously were the very first people to actually pull off a powered flight back in the early 20th century, in 1903. They were a couple of brothers from Ohio. They had a bicycle shop. They did a lot of bicycle repair, bicycle building, things like that. And they got interested in aviation. And first they developed the glider. And then based off the glider, they developed the first powered airplane, which they built and they took to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and they did their famous flight, which of course I'm sure everybody can even visualize that picture of the one brother standing waving and the other brother maybe about 25 feet off of the ground flying in that aircraft. So the Wright brothers were really very much pioneers in aviation. Now, of course, they weren't the only ones in the world that were trying to develop an airplane. There were particularly in France, they were very, very big developing the airplane. We'll talk a little bit about that and how the Wright brothers focusing on their intellectual property and their patents, sort of.
But by the way, Tom, when you talk about, anytime you see a special about the Wright brothers, they show some old-timey black and white footage, and there's always a bunch of contraptions that are exploding, or going directly into the ground or going off a cliff. I bet we're all thinking of there's one that kind of looks like a plunger that's going up and down, and it just kind of
right. That's a famous one.
It's just kind of bouncing them around. But that's kind of what I picture anytime someone tells a story. But that is neither here nor there. Please continue.
No, that's definitely true. And I mean, it sounds like it's a very simple thing. I mean, after all, as we talked about in the meeting, man has always been an imitator. And of course, we've observed birds flying for how many years, and yet we could never really figure out how to do flight itself. And of course, because it's an equation that involves lift and thrust. And so the Wright brothers were the first ones to really practically figure out how to get it done, whereas all those other attempted inventors, or also RANs, you might call them, were only able to get it to bounce on the ground or maybe go a couple of feet and crash and things like that, because they weren't able to get the right balance, whereas the Wright brothers were. So they are definitely pioneers. They definitely deserve the moniker of the inventors of powered flight. And they did, in fact, try to protect their invention with a patent. The issue is that when they tried to protect it with the patent, they were very, very focused on the technique for turning the airplane, which was a wing warping. Basically, to describe it without showing it, you think about the fact that if you stick your hand out a window of a moving car and you put it, you tilt it backward, it kind of pushes your hand up. If you tilt it forward, it kind of pushes your hand down. Well, that's basically what they were doing with the wingtips, was, tilting them one way, bending them one way or the other, warping them in order to get the wing to go up or down on that side. And so that was what they really focused their patent claims on.
Just to put people in kind of the time period. So this patented issue, and by the way, I had a listener tell me, you don't have to give us the numbers of the patents. We do not remember them and we will not look them up. Just post them in the show notes and we will look at them. So
Well, it's really trendy now, Mike. I mean, you see people on these Zoom calls, they all have pictures of patents behind them. There are numbers on those things, of those little sketches, on these, you see people on ESPN with different pictures of patent drawings. Those are the things that we're talking about here. So you can look them up on pretty easy on the internet if you want to take a look at some of these drawings.
let me tell you, this is why I'm going to ignore my friend who told me that. And I'm going to tell you that we are up to over 11 million numbered patents.
Mm-hmm.
This is patent number 821393. So we're still in 6 digits. It was filed March 23, 1903. So just to put you in, I want everyone to picture, sepia tones and black and white and people moving kind of very jerky movements in the film as Tom tells a story, and that's how it should unfold in your imagination. But you're talking about, Tom, the focus of the patent, and we talk about patent claims, we're talking about the part of the patent where you actually outline precisely what you believe to be your invention. So tell us about the Wright brothers and their focus of the patent claims.
Right. So the focus of their patent claims, as you pointed out, Mike, what they believed to be their invention was that technique for controlling by the wing, essentially the wing warping. So what you're protecting in your patent is specifically what you claim, what you can enforce, as I'm sure has been discussed in other podcasts, is what you can enforce is the metes and bounds of the claim. That's what you can prevent another person from making, using, selling, etc. And so the Wright brothers decided to focus their claims on these wing warping techniques, and to such a degree that they didn't even begin to make improvements on their aircraft. Joe mentioned about discussing that we can discuss the patent wars. They were really more focused on the litigation and the fighting of the patent than they were on actually developing this unbelievably revolutionary invention that no one else had come up with yet, but now was going to take away from them.
Yeah, I think that people would imagine that if you were to pull up the patent and to look through it and to get to the end of it, where the claims are always the last thing in the patent, it might say something like, hey, we invented planes, or hey, an airplane, a flying machine. Like a flying machine, exclamation point, parentheses, we did it.
Yeah.
Right.
and it's not at all. That's why when you gave the presentation, I was so surprised at what they, kind of the rabbit hole they went down protecting the technology and what they thought would be kind of the driver.
That's always the craziest part, Mike, when you see some of these things looking backwards, what the inventors think are actually important. Like when taking a step back, it's like they're kind of missing the big picture with what they were actually working on, or what was deemed revolutionary. And like Tom will get into a little bit, that it seemed Orville and Wilbur were definitely distracted and focused so much on their patent that they weren't really continuing to drive forward with this amazing idea that they had.
Yeah, right, and that's exactly the case. It turned out that they were able to sort of enforce their patent in the U.S., but they weren't as able to enforce it in Europe, of course, because of the fact that first of all, there wasn't as much international cooperation and collaboration as we have today, and there was a little more rivalry between nations back then. So, of course, France's courts are going to look at they're going to look more favorably toward French inventors if French inventors say no, that patent doesn't cover my aircraft. And it is, again, getting back to what Joe just said, it isn't just a matter of fighting the patent. It's the getting so obsessed with the fighting the patent that if you think about it, and I'm sure these are terms that people know today, fuselage, aileron, things like that. Uh, Everybody knows what a fuselage is. Well, fuselage is a French word. I mean, of course, it probably would have been called body of the aircraft if we had been the ones who, or if Orville and Wilbur Wright had focused more on their aviation invention than their patent. But instead, we use all French names for parts of an airplane because they really overtook us when aviation was in its infancy, coming up with much better aircraft and really refining things to a degree that when we entered World War I, we were flying French aircraft to begin with.
Yeah, and a lot of that, Tom, as I was doing the research here, it was due to how the Wright brothers were attempting to enforce their patent, and all the litigation. It was tied up in the courts so much that it really stifled a lot of American innovation, um, due to how aggressive they were at pursuing patent protection on their idea. Again, one of the things we mentioned on here is when you have a patent, you're able to exclude others from practicing your idea, and you're able to make other people that are having infringing products obtain a license for you. So you're paid for your idea. What sort of happened here in the Wright brothers case, when looking back, and some legal scholars are now evaluating things in today's lens, if this were to come up nowadays, the Wright brothers protection wasn't as broad as it was perhaps enforced by the courts at that time. And that really had it hampered some innovation in the U.S. in this space, so that when World War I came along, the government almost had to step in and say, okay, we have to do away with some of these patent rights, or we have to make other companies. We sort of we're stepping in and letting other companies sort of make some flight products for us to use here, because we're definitely going to be behind going into this war.
That's for sure. And you don't want to be that's one thing you definitely as a nation do not want to be behind the curve on is technology for warfare.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to post a link to the patent, and it definitely is a piece of history to see the patent drawings and to recognize it as that Kitty Hawk.
Sure.
Exactly as you would picture it. It really is what you see in the movies. And by the way, Joe, you actually did find a Wright Brothers movie.
I did.
And by the way, if we're not happy about it, when the listeners hear about it, they'll know why neither of us sound happy about finding this movie.
Yeah, like, there are, different movies about different inventors at different times, especially the early 20th century. A lot of inventing, a lot of new space. It was just a confluence of things. But the last movie that I saw, and this is perhaps why we don't have a movie about the Wright brothers in recent time, it was a television movie from 1971, starring James and Stacy Keach. So the Keach brothers of acting fame were playing the Wright brothers of aviation invention fame. And I don't know if that movie's been seen by anyone in perhaps the last 45 years or so.
I'm going to throw this out there, Mr. Scorsese, if you're listening. Wright Brothers movie, DiCaprio.
There you go.
Let's see, who would be the other brother? Tobey Maguire. There it is.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That would go great.
I'd even take a comic version with Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly. I'd have them play the Wright brothers.
Now that's all I'm going to think about after we stop recording. But I guess, Tom, so they get the patent, they focus it in a way that they believed would be the strategy for how it could control flight.
Right. You would think that there are in such a revolutionary invention that certainly the way of controlling flight is a very important aspect. Not only being able to fly forward, but also being able to turn the aircraft is certainly a very important facet of flight. But you would think that with such a revolutionary invention that you could find a way to claim the revolutionary invention as a whole or other components and aspects of it.
Tom, I have a question. So this patent issued on May 22nd, 1906. They spent the good part of the next decade, in various patent battles. And then sometime around 1917, it basically resolved in a way that actually does reflect some modern day solutions where multiple parties have patents. And I guess, can you talk a little bit about kind of how this all came to an end for the Wright brothers, at least the surviving Wright brother, and the end of their particular aviation patent war?
Right. It became a complete distraction because, it turns out that there are other ways that wind up being more effective ways of providing the control aspect of an aircraft. Wing warping is great when you have a material that can be warped, such as that cloth or canvas material, but it's not really that practical when you have a metal wing, an aluminum wing. So, of course, you've got, as aircraft are becoming more advanced, you're going to need a way to deflect those wings as well. You're not going to be able to warp them without an incredible amount of torsion being able to be generated at the wingtip, which you don't want. So what they did was they created ailerons, which are basically on the back end, the trailing end of the wing, is a little cutout piece that can swivel either down or swivel up. The same way I mentioned earlier, if you stuck your hand out of the window and you swiveled the back of your hand up, it kind of pushes your hand down. If you swiveled the back of your hand downward, the wind kind of pushes your hand up. So that's basically an aileron. It's basically put on there. So now you've got your patent, which is really designed to protect the wing warping technique. Although they did try to argue that it should also apply against ailerons, it really doesn't protect them. It really isn't directed toward those. So now you've got your patent, the very first patent in a flying machine, as anyone will look up the patent will see, as opposed to a flying machine, and you don't really have as much to enforce. So they instead of so there's a couple of issues there. I mean, one, if the claim had been written a little more broadly, then they wouldn't have had to have fought so hard in the court system, and they probably could have focused a lot more of their energy and their money on developing their revolutionary invention. If they had not been so worried about their intellectual property rights, then they probably could have had a discussion with Curtis or some of the other people who were coming up in America with the technology, aviation technology, and they could have either cross-licensed technology that each other came up with, and they could have really blown the lid off of aviation. But they chose to go the other route. They had a claim that was somewhat narrow, and they kind of spent an enormous amount of energy and resources to try and enforce that claim.
Yeah, and so basically a few different companies put together in what we now think of as a patent pool. So multiple companies will put all of their technology together, and people can be free to license the whole package of patents so that they can then practice in that space. And that was kind of the solution that had it all come to an end, probably after it was too late financially or in a business sense for the Wright brothers company to recover. So they really, for all of the fame and the fact that to this day we know who they are, it was kind of squandered in their own time, which is really not unheard of when you hear some of the historical stories. But when you think of them or when you learn about them in school, and when you see the picture, Kitty Hawk, famous, artist renderings or photographs, you would assume that we still know about them to this day. They must have lived lives of luxury flying around with large mustaches and caps and scarves fluttering in the wind, but it just was not so.
And that explains sort of a little bit of this, like how the French companies and that sort of developed like it did. But then looking back, it's amazing how, obviously there was World War I, which advanced technology in the aviation space. But then you look at Howard Hughes and some of the things he was coming up with in the time that he worked. It's amazing how fast we've got from the Wright brothers and what they were doing to advanced flight or so, like 40 years after this. It's, looking back, it's amazing how quickly once someone comes up with this breakthrough in a space where a lot of people are working so long in figuring out how to get something in the air, that people can take that idea and just keep compounding the gains made with it.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you went from the very first powered flight to landing a man on the moon a mere 66 years later. I mean, that's just remarkable. It's just incredible. A single lifetime. We went from the very first flight to putting a man on the moon.
So I guess some of the lessons here for our listeners that are perhaps inventors in a completely new, innovative space is get good patent attorneys early, and don't write your claims very narrow when obtaining patent protection on something, and perhaps always keep a continuation pending.
Keep continuation pending, and don't lose sight of your invention for the IP. The IP is very important, but don't lose sight of what you're really trying to do.
But with that, so listen, Tom, we would love, I mean, if you came back and we did another episode on aviation and talked about, I know there's the famous patents in the helicopter area. We didn't talk about jet engines. There's so much to explore, in the IP of flight. So, Joe, any parting words from you?
No, it's just I'm excited to get back up in a plane again. I'm glad my pilots are trained, knowing how engines go out and everything. I feel a lot safer up there. And no, it was great, Tom. Thanks for the insight. And yeah, the Wright brothers. It's whenever you think about flight, just want everyone to think about some of the patents and that sort of are behind some of these ideas. And there's always a story.
Listen, and to all our listeners out there, thank you for listening. And good luck. We're all counting on you.
The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com.